Mr. Sowell, if we're a land that in God we trust, and Jesus says, let the children come to me, wouldn't you agree that we need to open our arms to Mexico?
No, because every country has to protect its own borders. There was a time when virtually every country in the Western Hemisphere not only allowed but encouraged immigration on a massive scale because they had the land and they needed the resources and so on. It's not at all clear that if you were to throw the borders wide open, let anyone come who wants to, that this would still be the same country 50 years from now. And so, in a sense, you can't let everybody come to America, because if everybody came to America, it wouldn't be America anymore. So that's not an option that we have. The most we can do is try to weigh many very different kinds of considerations.
Well, judging from the success of various groups in your book, who should come to America? How should we decide?
Oh, that's a much tougher one, but I think that we should say that we do have the right to decide. And if people who come here from country X do well and make America a better place, then let more people come here from country X. And if people who come from country Y simply come here and become a burden on the American taxpayers, then less people should come from country Y. One of the problems we have is that the welfare state makes it very expensive to let immigrants in. Mm-hmm. So you have a country like New Zealand, whose total population is less than that of New York City. You know, and they have all kinds of barriers against immigrants. You know, they've got 60 million sheep there and 3 million people, and vast amounts of empty land. But the point is, once you put your foot on New Zealand soil, you're entitled to all kinds of benefits at the expense of the taxpayers, and therefore the taxpayers don't want you. So it's not just a question of the number of people in the land, it's a question of what kind of system do you have. And one of Germany's problems, one of the reasons for the great hostility to immigration in Germany, is that they are a welfare state. If this was a place where you come in and it's up to you to support yourself, I suspect you'd have a lot less resistance to immigration. And it's more than that, it's the so-called multiculturalism, which is really encouraging people to paint themselves into their own little corners and try to make it on their own. And that is one of the most horrible thoughts to me, because if there's one thing I've learned from all the years I've spent doing the research for this book, it is that every nation, every great civilization has borrowed heavily from the rest of the world. I mean, the very paper that we use, you know, was invented in China. The letters were Latin. The numbers came from India. Mm-hmm. You know, you go through the whole list there. And what you're saying to various people is you're to be off in your own little world and make it all on your own. And I just don't think that can be done. No one's done it so far.
This book is really quite an achievement in tracing the history of migrations throughout the world. What would you say is the most important lesson it teaches us as we debate the issue today?
Well, first of all, it says that there is no such thing as immigrants in general, that there are immigrants from different places with radically different skills, that every group has a very pronounced pattern, has a pronounced pattern of skills. If you look, for example, among the Germans, you find them brewing beer in Germany and the United States and Buenos Aires and Australia. You find them you know, making lenses in Germany and here and other places. You find people settling. They don't even settle at random. People who move from Italy to Australia do not move from Italy in general to Australia in general. They'll move from one town in Sicily to one town in Australia. And a town a couple of miles away from that town in Sicily will send nobody, because there is not the knowledge built up there. And so the knowledge builds up in this one little Sicilian town about this one little tiny part of Australia. And that's where the people go.
My name is Rocio, and I came from Mexico in '81. I came with the idea of wanting to integrate myself to the American society. I knew some English when I came here, and I have never lived off welfare. I have always lived a productive life. I got married in 1984, and then I stopped working to raise my 4 children. The problem that I have had is that when I listen to people that says, well, in this case, Mexicans should act like that, should dress like that, I am in a position that I have always tried myself to integrate to the society. And reality is that no matter what you do, no matter what you accomplish, people will always put that barrier in front of you, and they will not let you come in. So whenever I hear that they said, oh, but they like to live in their ghettos, speaking their languages, that is not true, because I'm a living proof of that. And of course, when it comes to people living off welfare, it makes me upset when even Mexicans, my own race, do that, because I'm working for that and I'm paying taxes. But on the other hand, it is very sad that one day my children could listen a negative comment about his mother's race just because the fact that she is Mexican. And so how do you deal with that?
Okay.
I don't know, but I must say that living in California for more than 20 years, I have never seen a Mexican American begging on the streets. People tell me that people on the streets, have misfortunes, and I say, do no misfortunes ever fall upon Mexican Americans? Because they never go out in the streets and beg. They work. And I don't think that there is this tremendously negative picture of Mexican Americans. I think that, again, the activists are pushing for the bilingualism and whatnot. And in fact, the activists make it a point to minimize the input of the mothers and fathers on school decision making, because if you leave it up to the parents, the Mexican American parents will say, teach the kid English.
But yeah, I see your point, and of course I see your point. But now, if you have this big influx of immigrants, and for whatever reason, let's say our economic system isn't promoting their income advance to the level that the self-appointed, the anointed expect. We saw with the New Deal, after the Depression hit, the anointed decided that because the immigrants weren't doing very well, we had to mandate equality through the coercive use of the federal government with the New Deal. Isn't there some danger with 20, 30 million immigrants coming in that we're beginning to see a huge new swath of unskilled labor in this country, that even though the immigrants may not be begging, you may not see the immigrants begging, that the anointed will in time use their status to push
I think a major part of immigration problems are caused by people in the United States who use the immigrants for their ideological purposes. There's no question about that.
Okay.
The immigrants are coming here because of something they find here that they don't find in their own homeland. Obviously, if you allow this to become just like their homeland, there won't be any benefit to them, and it'll be a tremendous loss to the people who are already here. Most of the immigrants themselves want to speak English. The reason there's a controversy is that you have many activists, both from within the group and people in the larger society, who want to keep them foreign. But most of the immigrants themselves want to become Americans.
Self-appointed do-gooders.
Oh, you got it.
I want to talk more about
the mere fact that so much of what was once Mexico is now the southwestern United States is due to the fact that all the Americans settled in Mexico as immigrants, pledged to become part of the Mexican scheme of life, and after a while decided they didn't want to do that. And therefore they took themselves and the land and joined it to the United States. So this can happen. You can have immigrants in such large numbers that they become a threat to the system themselves. Of course, the Roman Empire had that problem when the barbarians settled.
Was that happening in California now? I mean, we have Mexican immigration coming in, bilingual education.
Oh yes.
Long-term bilingual ballots. Talk about non-citizen voting in San Francisco now. The Mexican government is becoming increasingly active in asserting.
Yes.
I mean, are we beginning to see?
Yeah, I think the tragedy is that a lot of the immigrants, of course, come in illegally, which means we have no control whatsoever over what kind of people come in, other than those who are willing to come in. What shocks me is that people who try to cross that border and are caught are turned loose scot-free to try 2 or 3 more times that week. Meanwhile, you're cracking down on businessmen who are trying to run a business, and you're trying to recruit them as law enforcement agents to enforce laws that the Immigration and Naturalization Service is not enforcing.
Well, what should it mean? Who should determine whether someone's legal or not legal in the United States? Just the Federal Immigration Service?
Yes, and I think what you need is to get away from squeamishness. I can't believe that you couldn't stop this immigration from Mexico, for example. If you dug trenches 5 feet deep in the earth and filled them with concrete so nobody could,
You afraid of a national ID card?
I'm afraid of what it would be used for, but I hate to see a problem dealt with not by attacking those who create the problem, but by attacking vast numbers of other people who have nothing really to do with that problem. I'm afraid what would be done with a national ID card. But if you had fences that went 5 feet into the ground and 10 feet above the ground and barbed wire on the top, I suspect we'd get just a few high jumping athletes coming into the United States.
Do you think that the school vouchers that are being proposed for some of the inner city children would help to bring, the immigrants as well as the other disadvantaged children into more of an American attitude or help them bring them up?
I don't know. The voucher has a lot to recommend it simply because the public schools are so bad that it would be hard to come up with something that's worse. And I think the competition would itself improve the public schools a lot. The fact that they have a monopoly is really the key to their mediocrity.
I have been really surprised that more black leaders have not spoken up because basically it seems to me that it's the black people who have lost the most through job opportunities with this unlimited immigration. I'll give you an example. I noticed this under the Carter administration back when I used to be a waitress in a restaurant. And we'd have a job opening, and we'd get 50 calls from Washington, D.C., from black people, you know, who wanted the jobs. And the management of the restaurant would end up hiring an illegal Mexican to do the work. And I thought this was terrible, whereas before the blacks were always getting those jobs in restaurants and things. This has been, now you've got Indians, Pakistanis, all these different people have taken these jobs over, and it's pushed the blacks more and more into this basically a ghetto existence, except for the few, the minority, who've been able to get out. And it's pushed them further into drugs and everything else. This should have been their chance, that, you know, with the equal opportunity and everything, to get up the ladder and to really assimilate into the population. It really hasn't happened.
In some particular cases, what you say may be true, but there have been studies done of places where there's a heavy Mexican immigration, for example, and the unemployment rate among blacks in those areas tends to be lower than it is elsewhere. There's not some fixed number of jobs from which the immigrants, you know, you subtract the number that go to the immigrants. The immigrants themselves create jobs, both when they're employers and simply by the fact that they increase the national output, which increases the demand and therefore increases the demand for labor. So it's not at all clear to me that the immigrants take the jobs away. What may happen in many cases, however, and in many countries, is that the immigrants, because they come in, and particularly at the bottom level jobs, they prevent the wages from rising enough in those jobs to wean people away from the welfare state benefits. In much of the literature, they don't want to admit that there are any problems created by immigrants, but of course there are problems. The mere differentness of people will create problems. And if there's hostility, then of course you don't need higher levels of hostility in the society, whether or not the hostility is justified.
Do you think it is today?
Justified?
The hostility that's growing?
It's misdirected. There should be hostility toward those who are promoting multiculturalism and the welfare state.
Okay. The book is Migration and Cultures. Thomas Sowell is the author. You can pick it up. It's in your bookstores now.
Originally you said you were a Marxist and then you became a conservative?
Oh, yes.
I wonder what influenced you to become a conservative.
Working for the government.
Really?
Yes. That's what convinced Milton Friedman, by the way. He was a liberal before he worked for the government.